So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining this latest session of our OIE Meetup series. Today's session is focused on blockers, upgrade blockers, and specifically kind of helping to break through any blockers that might be impeding your progress towards upgrading to OIE. So there are a number of blockers that get called out that are maybe a little confusing, or maybe the actual impact is not totally clear from some of the documentation. So that's what we're hoping to address here today. We just a couple of logistical things before we dive in. We do have some moderators on the session with us to help monitor the Q&A. So as you have questions, as we go through the content today, please post your questions in the Q&A. That'll help us kind of track the questions. And we'll try to leave time at the end of the session today to address any of those questions that we can live during the session. And we'll also have some moderators who are monitoring that and responding directly in the Q&A. If there are any questions that we're not able to address either live or through the Q&A console directly in this session today, I will be posting a full transcript of all the questions posted with answers in the community sites, which I'll post a link to here shortly. So with that, let me go ahead and move on to, I guess, introducing our presenters for today. As always, I'm joined by my colleague Dimitri from our product marketing group. We also are joined by Andy and Dan, who are part of the product acceleration team. These guys are the real brains of the operation and will be monitoring the Q&A to help answer your questions. And my name is Brent Arrington. I'm also from the product acceleration team, and I'll be helping go through some of the, I guess, some of the top blockers, the most common blockers that we run into based on just total customer count, as well as just anecdotally from the questions that we get in office hours, et cetera. Before we do dive in, I do have to present you with our ubiquitous safe harbor statement. So there may be forward-looking statements during today's presentation. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to my partner in crime, Dimitri, to talk us through a little introduction here.
Thank you, Brent. So welcome everyone to this session. Morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. So I don't want to spend too much time here. I just want to give you a quick introduction. So first on the agenda, you're going to hear me for 2-3 minutes here. Then we have assembled a menu of the top 6 blockers that we've seen based on our experience helping people like you upgrade to OIE. So we'll be covering these. Then we'll go into a Q&A session, so you will have the opportunity to bring your own blocker if you have one in mind and that you want to discuss in this forum here. We'll see also that there are other opportunities for you to get support on your personal own blockers. We'll talk about that. And if we have time, because we really want to focus the session on helping you, we will go back through how to upgrade and some of the resources available. We've covered these plenty in other webinars, so if we have more questions at the end, we will favor answering the question, and we will post links on how you can get more details on the upgrade process and the resources. So moving on, I had the privilege, my accent probably doesn't tell, but I had the privilege to live 5 years in England. So I never miss an opportunity to quote Sir James Murray and the Oxford Dictionary. So just as a quick fun reference here, and no, OIE is not in the Oxford English Dictionary. It might, I hope, one day. But yeah, we're going to be focusing on blockers today, and hopefully we will help you. So this is the menu that we've assembled, and Brent's going to go through this. So we're going to talk about email optional enrollment. We're going to talk about Okta Mobile. We're going to look at the MFA Policy app conditions, factor enrollment policy as well, the do not enroll aspect, and on the Office 365 angle, custom user agent and the pass claim. So this is what we've assembled. Hopefully that maps to some of yours. And I'm going to let Brent run the show here, and I'll come back for the upgrade process. Shall we have time? Brent?
All right. Awesome. So as you saw, we're going to go through 6 of the most common blockers today. Again, we'll try to leave some time at the end if you have questions about either any of these that we're going over today or any other blockers or any questions in general, we'll try to leave time at the end for those as well. But these are just some of the most common things that we run across. So we're going to start with email optional enrollment. And this one, it's the one I wanted to start with because, number one, it affects probably the largest group of people, and it's also the simplest one to deal with if you're on Classic. So this one, if you are on Classic, you may see this might appear in two possible ways. So you might see this if you haven't done anything, if you haven't taken any action at all, you would see this as a configuration option. And if you see it as a configuration option, what you want to do is go under settings and features, and there is a self-service early access feature called enable optional email enrollment for Okta Identity Engine. If you are in Classic, you want to go ahead and turn this feature flag on. This feature flag has absolutely zero impact whatsoever if you're in Classic, so there's no reason not to turn it on. What this does is basically ensure that when you do upgrade to OIE, the behavior that you see currently for the optional setting for email factor enrollment stays very much the same after you upgrade to OIE. So this one should be very straightforward. If you're on Classic, absolutely turn this on and then acknowledge the acknowledgement item and you're good to go. There's no reason not to do it. It doesn't have any impact at all on Classic. And what it really does is keep the behavior in OIE much more aligned with the current behavior that you have today in Classic. Now, if any of you are on the webinar and you're already on OIE and you see this feature flag, you might want to be a little more cautious in enabling this because this will, if you enable this feature flag and you're already on OIE, it will change the behavior from what the default behavior is without that feature flag in OIE. In OIE, without this feature flag, the default behavior for the optional setting is really very much like the required setting. Essentially, it's always going to auto-enroll the email factor, even if you set it to optional by default in OIE. That will change if you turn this on and you're already in OIE. So just be aware of that. It will change the behavior if you're already in OIE and don't have this turned on. But if you're in Classic and you see this feature flag, absolutely turn this on. There's no reason not to do it. And then that will change your upgrade hub to make this just an acknowledgement item. So it's going to tell you after OIE, email will not be auto-enrolled unless it's required. It makes it sound like that's a big change, but in your case, it really isn't. It's keeping the behavior much more aligned with what you currently have today. So that's that one. The next very frequent one that we see is Okta Mobile. And this is one that gets called out very frequently. And in many cases, there's really no impact at all. So the basic idea here is that the Okta Mobile app is no longer supported in OIE. Functionally, though, you can get the exact same functionality from the native browser just by going into a native browser and logging into your Okta dashboard from a native mobile browser. There's only one exception to that, and that would be if you have users who are using SWA applications through the Okta Mobile app on a mobile device. That's the only use case that would be impacted here. If you look at the documentation for this, and you should see this link when you go to when you look in your upgrade hub. Each one of these items that get called out will have a learn more link that will take you to additional documentation around this. This is the additional documentation around the Okta Mobile blocker item. In this, you'll find a handy system log query that you can use to detect all the traffic that's coming in from the Okta Mobile app, either on iOS or on Android. This will tell you who is using the Okta Mobile app. So if you want to do some outreach to let people know that this, the ability to log in through the Okta Mobile app is going to be going away once you upgrade, you can do that. If you want to see the full scope of impact, like if you want to know whether or not you actually have people accessing SWA applications, you can actually add one additional thing to that. So if we look at our system log, We can find, let me see, somewhere I had access to a, let's see, what was it? I think it was, let's look for Spotify. Where did I find this one? So there is a, let's do this. So we want to look for the debug. Debug content, debug data, and we want the authentication. It's our sign-on mode. Let's see. Let's sign-in mode. Here we go. Debug context, debug data, sign-on mode, and you want to look for secure web authentication, right? So if you take this and combine it with the filters here, so if you say both the client is Okta Mobile and our sign-on mode is secure web authentication, this will tell you the full, like really who would be impacted, right? This is going to tell you not just that they're accessing your tenant through the Okta Mobile app, but whether they're accessing specifically any applications that would no longer be able to access directly without the Okta Mobile app. Now, it's important to note that's only applies to mobile devices. The SWA applications, if you do have SWA applications, those will continue to function exactly as they do today in the full desktop browser. That's all brokered through browser plugins, not through like any Okta Mobile application or anything like that. So those will continue to function. It's only the mobile access to those SWA applications that would be impacted there. All right. And I know there may be some questions coming in on that. We'll come back to these towards the end and make sure that we address all the questions, but I want to make sure we get through all of the blockers as well. So that's pretty much it for the Okta Mobile blocker. For MFA policy app condition. Now this one is another one where the number of people who get flagged for this one is actually far greater than the number of people who actually would be impacted by this. So what this is talking about is if you look at your multi-factor enrollment policy, so under security, multi-factor, and factor enrollment, somewhere you have at least one rule where you have under this section for users accessing, and you have either Okta or applications or both selected. Somewhere you've got a rule, or maybe more than one rule, where you've got one selected or the other selected, but not both. And the reason that this is called out is there is one very specific onboarding use case where you would see a different rule apply in OIE versus what would apply in Classic, right? So I want to start by like highlighting all the areas where you have no concern at all, right? So if your onboarding flow, so like the first time a user accesses the system and they're initially activating their account, if that initial onboarding flow ends with the user landing on the Okta dashboard, then you have no issue. Like if all of your onboarding flows end with the user landing on the Okta dashboard, there's absolutely zero impact on you for this particular blocker. So you can just acknowledge it and move on. You're good. If your onboarding flow, or if any of your onboarding flows end with the user landing on some downstream application, so anywhere other than the Okta dashboard, then potentially you could have an issue if your onboarding flow is facilitated through an activation link that gets emailed to the user. And more specifically, if that activation link is customized to include a from URI parameter that would then tell it what downstream application to forward to after they've activated, right? The impact there is that the way that that flow is treated in Classic is that it's considered a two-step process in Classic. So step one would be you land on Okta, which is like the root activation link. And so the rule that would apply in that scenario is a rule that has Okta selected. In OIE, once you upgrade, that same scenario would be treated differently. It would be treated as a truly SP initiated flow. And instead of the applicable rule being one where Okta is selected, it would be a rule where applications is selected. So potentially you could have a different rule that would be evaluated in OIE versus Classic in that very specific scenario. Now you're probably asking, how do I know if I'm doing this? Well, there are really only two ways to do this. One would be to customize the email template for your activation email. So if you look under your customizations, brands, and check out the emails and look at your various email templates. So if you look at the activation, and you would want to make sure there are multiple versions of the activation template. So there's one for just Okta user activation. If you have Active Directory users or LDAP users, there are different templates for those. So you'd want to make sure you check all of these. But if you look in your email template, and if you switch to the edit view so that you can actually see the text here, the code here, if you find the activation link, there's a variable in here for activation link. If I can find this. Okay, so in this case, this one is giving you the login and then your sign-in page here. Where is the? Here we go. Here we go. Here's the activation link. So this is what you're looking for. So you want to look for this activation link. Oops, what did I do? I'm going to look for this activation link per variable here. And if you have appended something like this, sorry, there we go. So if you've appended something like this from URI to the end of the activation link, then you have this use case. If you don't, if all you see is activation link and there's not some from URI parameter appended to that, then you're good. The only other way that you could do this outside of modifying your email templates would be if you have a custom application that is using APIs to create the users and suppress the Okta generated activation email, and instead generate its own email and build the link itself outside of the out-of-the-box Okta functionality. Those are really the only two ways that you could accomplish this goal. So unless you have one of those two very specific use cases, then for this blocker, you can just acknowledge it and you're good to go. All right. Next one, factor, and this is another one that deals with factor enrollment policies. This one is specifically calling out an MFA factor enrollment policy where you have the rule set to do not enroll. So if we go back and look at our multi-factor factor enrollment policies. So here, if you look at the rule level in Classic, you've got in this bottom section here where it says enroll in multi-factor, you've got three options. You can either prompt for enrollment in multi-factor the first time a user is challenged for MFA, or the first time a user signs in, period, or you can set it to do not enroll. This is what's being called out by that blocker. So somewhere you have one or more rules where you've set this to do not enroll. Now, typically, when you do this, it's because it's targeted to a specific group of users who you don't want to ever use MFA. So think system users, like like machine users, like non-person users. So whether it's service accounts or whatever the case may be, but it's some user that is not actually tied to a real person. It's more of a machine account. As long as that is the case, then you should have no problem, because typically those types of service accounts are created either administratively through the admin console or through API, but they're created with the password as they're created. So it's that user doesn't actually have to go through an enrollment policy for their password like a person might. If you think about an activation flow for an actual person, you might send them an activation link, then they click on it, then they get a page where they set their initial password and confirm it, and it sort of enrolls that initial password for them. As long as the account doesn't have to go through that type of flow, then you're fine. The reason it's called out is because once you get to OIE, there's no longer a distinction between password and any other authenticator. Password becomes just another authenticator, like anything else, like Okta Verify, like Google Authenticator, et cetera. And password becomes subject to these enrollment policies. So if I look at an OIE tenant, what you're going to see after you upgrade, if you look at your authenticators and enrollment policies, you're going to see that password now gets pulled into these enrollment policies along with all of your other authenticators. And by default, it's going to come over as, password is required, because it's always required in Classic. So it'll always come over with password required. But again, the rule where you're, setting it to deny or, to do not enroll, that would migrate over as deny enrollment of SSO authenticators. So you potentially could get in a scenario after upgrade where if an actual person has this policy apply and it says deny enrollment and they're trying to enroll a password, they could get stuck in the onboarding flow and not be able to enroll the password. So that's the reason that was called out. As long as the scope of that rule is limited to things like service accounts or non like machine accounts, like not actually tied to a real person, then you should be fine. If you do have any of those policies that are applied to people who would need to actually enroll a password, then you probably want to consider changing that before you upgrade. And one of the things that I see pretty commonly, a lot of times customers will have two things. They'll have like all of their authenticators set to disabled. And then in addition to that, they'll have do not enroll selected here. And that's kind of redundant. So if you have a scenario where you do want to block enrollment for like additional authenticators for a user, but still want to let them enroll in a password, what you can do is prior to upgrade, still leave all of these set to disabled, but just change this to either first challenge or first login, whatever, but move it away from do not enroll. That will still not allow them to enroll any of these other factors because they're all set to disabled, so they're not going to be able to enroll any of those other factors. But when the upgrade happens and password gets pulled in, password will be set to required instead of disabled. And since the rule is not set to do not enroll, they would be able to enroll the password and you'd be good to go. All right. So that's this one. Next on the list is Office 365, and this one specifically is around a custom user agent. So what this one is talking about is if you look at your Office 365 application, within the sign-in policies for Office 365, there are some options to identify sign-on policies targeted to specific client types. So if we look at our list of clients here, so in this client section, in the sign-on rule for Office 365, you've got some client types that are like called out here just out of the box. So browser, modern auth, Exchange, ActiveSync, etc. But then there's also this option for custom. And this is what's being called out. So if you have like, some custom client here, right? This piece would not migrate over automatically in OIE. So what you need to do is make sure that you, prior to upgrade, that you come and capture any custom client string that you're setting here in your sign-in policies for Office 365. Save this off, and then after you upgrade, if you find your Office 365 authentication policy, and there will be one specifically for Office 365 after you upgrade. So if you find that policy here, what you want to do is reapply that in your policy here. Now, it will be a little different in terms of how you input that. So if we look at the policies here in OIE, the UI is a little different. So the client section, you have these clients listed. So instead of checkboxes, you've got you've got a section where you can kind of plug in these, but there's nothing here for custom, right? So you've got these sort of pre-defined clients that you can select here, but there's not an option to set the custom one in this setting. What you have to do is use the setting above for the custom expression. And if you go and look at the documentation for this, it actually gives you an example of what that custom expression would need to look like. So if you look here, this is what the custom expression is going to look like. So you're going to use this request.useragent.contains, and then inside the quotation marks here is where your custom string would go. So the way that would translate over is request dot now I'm close this one. Now I'm forgetting my request user agent, and then use the contains method, and then here's where your some custom string, whatever it is, would go. If I could spell, here we go. So this is how you would plug this in. Now, the one key thing to note is because this is in a separate section, this is evaluated as an and. So if you have a scenario where you have all of these selected together, so you've got all of these out of the box, or any of these out of the box clients in addition to the custom string, then what you really want to do is split this out into a new rule that's separate from the other ones. And the reason for that is because in Classic, the way this is set up, all of these are evaluated as an or. So basically, if it's any of these clients, then this rule would apply. So like web browser, modern auth, ActiveSync, or custom, all of those would be evaluated as an or. So if it's any one of them, then this rule would apply. But when you have to migrate this over, because this is in a separate section and all of these are ands, these separate sections are all ands, this rule, the way it's written right now, would never be true, because it's not possible for the client to be both this custom client and any of these clients down here, right? So these that are part of this client list, these would evaluate as an or amongst themselves, but this one, this separate one, is going to evaluate as an and. So you would need to separate this one out into its own rule. So you could just get rid of these. So create a new rule, say any client for the client section, but then for the custom expression, you would call out your custom string, and then that would allow this to evaluate as an or. So if the client is this and only this, then this rule would apply, and then your separate rule would be get rid of this, and then any of these, and then that rule would apply. All right. And lastly, another Office 365 call out. This one is around Office 365 pass claims. So this is specifically talking about MFA requirements, or MFA policy requirements on the Microsoft side that are satisfied by virtue of a specific claim that we would pass to Microsoft when we're asserting you into O365. So in Classic, if you have a let me put this other way so I can see. If you have a sign-in policy at the global level that requires MFA, in Classic, that is enough to satisfy that pass claim requirement all the time. So even if you don't have a specific MFA requirement at the app policy level for O365, if you have it at the global sign-on policy level, that will always satisfy that requirement in Classic. In OIE, the way that the global session policy and the app level authentication policies, the way that they interact is a little different and a little more nuanced. And there may be some scenarios where even if you have an MFA requirement at the global session level, if you don't have it at the app level for the O365 app, it may not suffice for us to include the necessary claim when we assert you into O365 to satisfy the Microsoft's MFA policy requirements. And what you would see if that were to happen is kind of a looping behavior. So, you go to Microsoft, they redirect to Okta for authentication. We assert you back into O365, but without the necessary claim. Microsoft gets the claims, doesn't see the MFA claim that it's looking for, and it sends you right back. And you just keep bouncing back and forth between Microsoft and Okta. So if you see that behavior, the fix for that is post-upgrade, you go into your authentication policies, again, find the policy for O365, and make sure that your rules are requiring one of these two options here, either of these two-factor type options. So it could either be password IDP plus another factor, or it could just be any two-factor types. But as long as you're using one of these two that would require two-factor at the app level, then that would alleviate that issue, and you should have no problem. All right. So those are the ones that I wanted to make sure we covered. We've got a good bit of time that we can start addressing questions. So let me take a look at our Q&A and see what we have.
I think we have one on the pipe related to device trust. Andy, if you want to lead on this one, maybe.
Sorry, what was the question?
There is one question that we flagged to open live from Volodymyr. If you want to check.
Okay, I see it. So the question is, if you upgrade to OIE, does it impact existing configuration for Jamf Connect with OIDC app for Okta Classic? OIDC, not API off. I'm not quite sure I'm following. So
do we want to ask Volodymyr to clarify?
yeah,
because we're not sure if it's related to device trust or another configuration.
right.
Device trust is different in OIE. We call it device context, and we actually did a whole episode on that, but we can refer to that. Do we want to allow Volodymyr to talk and maybe double check?
Let me find you here so I can unmute you. Here we go.
I can do that. Okay.
Okay, you should be able to talk now.
Hello, Volodymyr.
Oh, thank you. So basically, yeah, I'm curious if after I upgraded my Okta Classic to Okta Identity Engine, I need to upgrade Jamf Connect. So for information, Jamf Connect basically is an OIDC application with token. With additional token authentication feature enabled, ROPG, etc. So basically, so after upgrade, should I immediately upgrade something in Jamf Connect, or it should work as it's a typical Jamf? It's a typical OIDC application with token with enabled token authentication features.
Okay, I see. So if you're already using the OIDC flow with Jamf, then you should be fine.
Yes.
If you're still using the API auth, that actually, I think their doing away with support for that. And once you get to OIE, you would want to move away from that anyway. But yeah, as long as you're already using the OIDC flow for that, then you should be fine.
I see. Thank you. Yeah, no, we eliminated API and migrated to OIDC about a year ago.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
All right. So let's continue moving down the list of questions here. So if a user gets redirected from O365 to Okta, set up the application level MFA to satisfy the MFA claim, will the user get prompted twice for verification once? No, not necessarily. That depends on how you set up your policy. So as long as you set up your policy at the app level, so that it doesn't prompt every time. So if you look at the app level policy here, once you set your, one factor or two factor requirements down below, you've got an option to set the cadence for when they would be prompted. So you can either set it, if you set it to every time, then yes, they would definitely get prompted twice. So you wouldn't want to do that. You could either specify a particular length of time, or you could just say as long as they have a session. So they would only get prompted when a session doesn't exist. Then they would not get prompted twice. So if they got prompted when they initially established their session and they provided authenticators that would suffice to meet this policy, then they would be fine. The only time they would get prompted again would be if, for some reason, the application or the policy at the global session level didn't require two-factor. If it didn't require two-factor, then they would get prompted for a second factor here, but it wouldn't be a double prompt because they didn't get prompted originally. The only other scenario would be if you had a situation where you specifically required certain types of authenticators here. So maybe you have, you require phishing resistant, or you get a little more prescriptive about which authenticators are allowed for O365, and they didn't, maybe they provided MFA, but not the specific MFA factors that are required here, then they potentially get prompted twice, but otherwise they should be fine. All right. Next one here. How do we assess what applications will be impacted with Okta classes? So if you're talking about applications, if you're talking about SSO integrations, so your downstream federations, whether it's SAML or OIDC or WSFed, whatever, other than like some of the specific callouts around like the Office 365 stuff that we've already talked about, there is no impact to any downstream federations. Like all your SAML integrations, all your OIDC federations, those all behave just the same as they do in Classic. So there should be no impact there. The exception would be things like the O365 pass claim stuff that would be called out if you have that scenario. So unless you have something specific like that that's called out, then there should be no impact to downstream federations. Next question. Is there a solution for macOS devices in clamshell mode? The lid is closed and connected to an external screen. It bypasses authentication methods set in OIE. Clamshell mode. To be honest, I'd never used this, so I'm not 100%.
I think what he's referring to is the fact that on a like a MacBook, the Touch ID is not accessible, right? When you close it and you're working in clamshell mode where it's closed, but you're connected to an external monitor and keyboard. That is actually, from my understanding, that is actually we are just hooking into the framework that Apple actually uses, and that's actually an Apple feature for the way that behaves. So we are reliant upon their framework for the way that the Touch ID system works, is my understanding of that.
Yeah. So to piggyback on that, like if you are able to use like a PIN as an alternative to the Touch ID for that, then that, as long as that's is allowable on the machine level, then that would satisfy our requirements as well. And there's actually a specific option that you can enable now for the biometrics, where you can either accept a PIN or passcode or the biometrics. So if that's an issue, you could potentially do that as well. All right. Next. Microsoft has a conditional access policy for phishing resistant MFA Classic. When any type of Okta MFA flag is passed back to 365, Microsoft does not detect this as phishing resistant MFA. Is there a way to around this to support MFA? I unfortunately I'm not familiar enough with the specifics of the Microsoft policy requirements to really be able to answer that. I don't know if anybody on the Andy, if you have any familiarity with that one, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure what their requirements would be as far as what they would recognize in the claim as a phishing resistant.
I'm actually not sure on that one either. That would probably be a great one to bring to one of the office hours, if you haven't already discussed that, Brent. That you could kind of dive in and go in a little bit deeper on that.
Yep.
We will definitely follow up on this call. And if you don't get your answer after the follow-up, Jonathan, feel free to sign up for an office hour. We'll talk about that a little at the end of the webinar, so we can address it deep dive.
Yeah, and I'll post this one. So we have this in the Q&A. So it'll be in the transcript that I post on the community site. One of our colleagues is more of a Microsoft nerd, so I'll follow up with him on this, and I'll get an answer for that one and make sure it's posted to the discussion site as well. All right. Next, we're using a custom Okta hosted login page as well as custom email and SMS templates and Okta hooks. Anything we should be aware of before upgrading? So yeah, so if you are using a custom Okta hosted login page, you probably have a call out for that in your upgrade hub. Any customization at all to that custom login page will get flagged and it'll get called out as an acknowledgement item. Basically, what you really want to do is just take that code. So if you go to customizations, brands, and find your go under pages and find your sign-in page, go into the code editor. You can grab the code for your custom login page. Just grab this, throw it into an OIE environment or non-prod, and just make sure that nothing breaks. Most likely, you don't have any issue unless you've done some specific, unless you've really tweaked some specific things with the widget itself on this. Like if you're just doing some customization around like styling or maybe adding, some custom HTML elements to the page, you're most likely fine. Unless you're doing like specific stuff around the widget JavaScript, or potentially if you're using some JavaScript to like access specific DOM elements that are rendered by the widget that might change, like the element IDs or the element names might change. Those would be the only things that potentially could be problematic. But the quickest thing to do is just grab the code here, throw it into an OIE environment in non-prod, and just make sure that nothing breaks and you should be fine. Otherwise, like for the email template, there should be no issue there at all. All right. Any impact on external IDP integrations when upgrading to OIE? No. So if you have an external IDP, like if you're, if you have external IDPs that users can use to authenticate into your org, that is not impacted at all. Are the sign-up policies that we may need to adjust or take care of? Is it the sign-up policies that we may need to adjust or take care of? In terms of the policies, everything should migrate over one for one. Like if you look, so in Classic, if you look at your authentication and sign-on policies, these will all map directly to security global session policy in OIE. So these global session policies are a direct mapping of your global sign-in policies from Classic. Those should all migrate over one for one. The only thing that you'll see that's new once you get to OIE is that there is this option to, there's this option here. So you can say, once you get to OIE, you can choose to say that the user can establish their initial session with any factor that would satisfy the app level authentication policy for the app they're trying to access. So in effect, you would defer to whatever app they're trying to access as they establish their initial session, as far as which authenticators are required. But by default, when you initially upgrade, everything is going to migrate over with password specifically selected. So this will be an option for you, but it's not going to be selected by default. So functionally, everything's going to migrate over as is at the global level. At the app level, functionally, everything will pretty much migrate over as is. There is one exception. In Classic, there's an option at the app level when you're defining the cadence for, let's just take any one of these. Where's my sign-on rule settings? Oh, that's because I'm in OIE. Let's look at my Classic org. Applications. So in Classic, if you look at the sign-on rules, so when you get to the section where you define the, if you're prompting for a factor and you're defining the cadence for when that prompt happens, in Classic, you have this option here, this only once option, which is effectively only once per device. That option does not exist in OIE. So if you have any rules that have this selected in Classic, when it migrates over, it's going to migrate as once per session. So what that would look like when you get here is you would have this selected. Otherwise, everything else should migrate over one for one. So you shouldn't have to worry about making any adjustments to policies before you upgrade. It should all just migrate over as is, with that one exception.
Just wanted to mention at this point that obviously the change in the policy framework is an important fundamental to learn about OIE. We did a full episode on that you'll be able to find in the YouTube playlist. So if you still have questions about the new policy framework, please watch this episode back. It should help as well.
Yep, absolutely. And that actually ties in perfectly to the next question on the list here, which is, do you have documentation on what will be different for end users going from Classic to OIE? We actually did a full webinar on that as well. So there was a webinar called Demystifying the Upgrade that you can find in our YouTube playlist, and we'll post that link here. Actually, while I'm thinking about it, let me go ahead and grab that link. And I'll throw these in the chat window for everyone here. So where is my chat window? Here we go. Okay, so I just posted several links in the chat window. The OIE playlist on our YouTube channel is the one where you'll find the links to all those webinars that we've been talking about. And then also in that list of links, you'll see just general OIE documentation, upgrade specific documentation. There's a link in there to the community site, the OIE discussion group on the community site. That's where you can go to sign up for office hours, or that's where I'll post the transcript for the Q&A after we finish this session as well. Okay. Next. Does upgrading to OIE have any impact to OAG? No, it does not. Operating with Okta support to remove email as mandatory in Okta Classic. Will this change be included in the migration to OIE? When you say remove email as mandatory, so
He's got a follow-up down there that he says, actually, correction, not email as mandatory, but to remove unique constraint on email.
Oh, gotcha. So yeah. So you've modified the profile settings. No, that would not change.
Yeah, there's no change in any of that. Correct.
Correct. Yeah. So that should not be impacted. Talk through transition process for Mac OS from Classic Engine Device Trust to the new method in OIE. Yeah. So for desktop device trust, you can leave your existing desktop device trust in place through the upgrade, and any of those devices that are currently managed will continue to be viewed as managed through the upgrade. So from a policy evaluation perspective, as long as they already have the cert on the machine, they will continue to be evaluated as managed through the upgrade and after you get to OIE. Now you will want to move over to the new like Okta Verify based way of doing the device trust for desktop device trust as soon as possible after you upgrade, because you won't be able to register any new devices until you do that. And then also for Mac, for Jamf in particular, I think at some point they are ending support for the classic way of doing device trust anyway. So you'll want to make sure that you move onto that. But from a migration standpoint, you can leave it in place. It will survive through the upgrade, and they'll continue to be evaluated as managed. And then once you roll out, like once you push out the Okta Verify app and they enroll via the FastPass mechanism with the cert through that mechanism, then the new cert will be authoritative, the old cert will be invalidated, and they'll show up as managed under the new flow. Okay. Can you talk about Okta FastPass versus Okta Verify with Face ID enabled? Yeah. So FastPass is really just, if we look at Okta Verify, Okta Verify supports multiple authentication mechanisms, right? So in Classic, there are two that are supported. There's the OTP, just the code, and then there's the push notification. In OIE, there's a third mechanism that's supported, and that's FastPass. So FastPass is just another authentication method that is part of the Okta Verify app that's supported by the Okta Verify app. As far as biometrics, so the FastPass is a specific flow that is like device bound. It's a PKI based flow that's device bound, and it only works when you're authenticating. It only works as an authenticator from the device that you're authenticating from, right? So like if you're on your desktop, you would have the Okta Verify app with FastPass enrolled on the desktop Okta Verify app, and it would authenticate you from there. It's not going to, like, you can't do FastPass from your phone to authenticate from your laptop, if that makes sense, right? It's authenticating directly from the device that you're trying to access it from. So it is device bound. Whereas the push notifications would still work, and you can require biometrics for the push or the TOTP, but that's not FastPass. That would be one of these other mechanisms. So it's all through the Okta Verify app. It's just a different authentication method. The mobile app supports all three. So the mobile app will support the code, push, or FastPass. The desktop app only supports FastPass. So if you're authenticating through your desktop and you want to use the desktop Okta Verify app, the only method that the desktop app supports is FastPass. Okay. We migrated to OIE almost a year ago, and there are some prerequisites for migrating from Classic to OIE. Have these checks already been completed? I mean, if you're already on OIE, then yeah, you're sort of past that point.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand that question either. I mean, maybe he can explain more.
Yeah. Let's see if we can.
Sounds like he's already on OIE though, so
Yeah.
I would say the checks have been completed.
Mario, you should be able to unmute yourself now if you wanted to follow up on that. Okay. In that case, I'll either take that as a no, or while we're waiting, let's move on to the next question here. Is there anything specific we should focus on if Okta if Okta SIAM is used instead of Okta Workforce? Okay, yeah. So for SIAM use cases, the biggest difference, just generally speaking, between SIAM integrations and workforce integrations is that SIAM integrations are far more likely to have customized login flows. So you're far more likely to have built your own login page, whether that's using the Authn APIs or Okta SDKs, or even an embedded Okta widget. And that is really where the complexity lies for SIAM flows. Like you want to make sure that you really thoroughly test your any custom authentication integrations that you've built against an OIE tenant to validate that they continue to work as expected in OIE. The other thing to bear in mind is that if you've built custom authentication flows using the Okta APIs or using classic SDKs, you can upgrade to OIE, and it doesn't necessarily mean anything's going to break. There, like the legacy, like the Authn API endpoint is still there. The SDKs, the classic SDKs, would still function from a backwards compatibility standpoint. But if you're looking to take advantage of any of the new functionality, like from an authentication flow standpoint, so like supporting FastPass, for example, or the I guess the expanded authentication policy framework, all of that stuff is built around the new OIE endpoint, not the classic endpoint. So even if you upgrade to OIE, if you're still pointing to the classic Authn API, or you're still using the classic SDKs, you're not going to see any of that new functionality. You're still basically going to be operating in classic mode, even after you upgrade to OIE. So that's one thing to consider if you're looking to take advantage of actual new functionality. Then you need to migrate off of the classic APIs or the classic SDKs and instead use the OIE SDKs, or move to using an embedded widget and have the widget operate in OIE mode instead of classic mode. And that will happen for the widget. That happens by default. You would have to explicitly tell it to operate in classic mode after you upgrade if you're on an OIE tenant.
The biggest recommendation, I guess, that I could make is that you should thoroughly test in a preview environment before you upgrade. And like you should try to make your preview environment as much identical to your production environment as possible, and then go through the OIE upgrade with a plan there, and then follow that same runbook or adjust that runbook accordingly before you do your production.
Yep, absolutely. And that's good advice for any like whether it's workforce or SIAM, but that's particularly critical for the SIAM use cases. You really want to make sure that any use case you have, particularly those customized login pages. And if you're building I guess another thing to call out is if you're building any customized end user management screens, like custom screens where users can manage their MFA enrollments, for example. There are some differences in the way the Factors API works. The Factors API stays the same, but the way that some of those authenticators are the way that they work in OIE is different. The best example is the phone factors, so SMS and voice. In Classic, you can only have one enrollment each, right? So you can have one SMS enrollment, you can have one voice enrollment, and that's it. So when you use the Factors API to try to retrieve their SMS enrollment or their voice call enrollment, there's only ever going to be one, and you know which one it is. In OIE, that changes. First of all, they're all merged together as just phone, so there's no longer a distinction between SMS enrollment and voice enrollment. It's just phone, and then the user can pick which how they want the code sent, whether via text or via voice call. But in addition to that, you can have multiple enrollments now. So if you're using the factors endpoint to try to retrieve an SMS enrollment or a voice enrollment in OIE, you may not necessarily get the specific enrollment you're looking for. If they've added multiple enrollments, you'll get a response back, but it may not be the specific one you're looking for. There is a new API called the My Account API for OIE that handles that distinction in OIE. So if you've built your own user account settings page, then you would probably want to look at transitioning over to the My Account API. All right, just doing a quick time check here. We are a couple minutes over. I see we have one more question or a couple more questions that just came through. I'll address these two really quickly, and then we'll call it a day. Before I do that, though, if anyone does have to drop, I will, as I said, post the full transcripts of the Q&A from this on the community site. So make sure you grab that link and check that out to find any follow-up questions. And otherwise, we thank you for your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Let me address these last couple of questions here really quickly. So for Okta Mobile,
yeah, I was going to address that. So that actually sounds more like you're talking about a mobility management.
Yeah.
All of those features sound more like MDM, so an MDM solution. So Okta does not provide an MDM solution, but there are quite a few of them out there. Just Jamf, AirWatch, or VMware, several different options for you there that could accomplish that same thing. Okta Mobile, just for clarity, was basically just a mobile browser, right? So that's and the product is now mobile browser friendly, so you can use the native browser on whatever device you're using, Android or iOS.
Yep. And for the link to the community site, that is in the chat window. I'll paste this there again. There's a whole series of links that are in the chat window. There's OIE Resource Hub, OIE Upgrade Hub, Developer Hub, and then OIE Office Hours and Discussion Group on the community site. That's the link where you'll have the we'll have the follow-up with a Q&A transcript there. All right, so we are a few minutes over. Again, thanks Dimitri, thanks Andy, and thanks Dan for helping out today, and thanks to all of you for joining. We will look forward to seeing you next month. We don't have the exact date yet, but it'll be sometime probably in late July be our next session, so be on the lookout for that as well. All right, thanks again, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Meeting you with a view to a kiss.